What if I told you that getting good with money has less to do with how smart you are and way more to do with how you act? We're often taught that finance is all about spreadsheets and formulas, right? A hard science. But what if the real secret to financial success is actually a soft skill? What if it's all about psychology? Let's dig into that idea, and we'll start with a story of two very, very different people. Okay, so picture this. On one side, you have a janitor, a guy with a modest income, no fancy financial degree, just living a quiet, everyday life. And on the other side, you've got a high-flying executive. We're talking Harvard-educated, MBA, top of the finance world. So here's the question. Between those two, the janitor and the executive, who do you think ended up quietly becoming a multimillionaire? The answer is probably not who you think. It was the janitor, a man named Ronald Reed, who spent his life working as a gas station attendant and sweeping floors, somehow built an $8 million fortune. So what was his secret strategy? It was shockingly simple. He saved what he could, he invested it in big, stable companies, blue chip stocks, and then he did the hardest thing of all. He just waited for decades. That's it. That was the whole plan. And the executive, Richard Fiscone, he had every advantage you can imagine. The education, the career, the connections. But in the mid-2000s, he got greedy. He took on huge amounts of debt to build an even bigger, more lavish lifestyle. And when the 2008 financial crisis hit, he was totally wiped out. He ended up telling a bankruptcy judge, "I currently have no income." These two stories, Ronald Reed and Richard Fiscone, they perfectly captured the core idea of this book. The author Morgan Housel says it best. Financial success is not a hard science, it's a soft skill, where how you behave is more important. The janitor who had the right temperament, who was patient, ended up doing way better than the brilliant executive who had no control over his greed. It all comes down to behavior. That's the key. So, if it's not about being the smartest person in the room, what is it about? Well, it's about understanding the hidden forces, the psychology that drives how we think about money. And it all starts with one simple truth. No one's crazy. Okay, so this is a really important concept. No one is crazy. People do some pretty wild things with their money, for sure. But here's the thing. Their choices almost always make perfect sense to them at that moment. Why? Because our personal experience with money, which is this tiny, tiny fraction of what's happened in the world, makes up like 80% of how we think the whole system works. For instance, just think about this. If you were born in 1950, the stock market basically went nowhere during your teenage years and your 20s. So you learned stocks are risky, they don't really go up. But if you were born in 1970, you saw the market go up almost 10 times during that same part of your life. You learned stocks are an amazing wealth machine. It's the same world, just a different point in time, and it creates a completely different, deeply held belief about money. See, neither person is crazy, they're just a product of their own unique history. But it's not just our personal history that's pulling the strings. Our financial lives are also massively influenced by two powerful unseen siblings that we usually try to ignore: luck and risk. Now, we all know Bill Gates is a genius. No one's debating that. But his story also includes an unbelievable dose of good luck. Back in 1968, he just so happened to go to a high school, Lakeside School, that was one of the only high schools on the entire planet that had a computer. I mean, just think about those odds for a second. 1 in a million. Gates himself has said that if there had been no Lakeside School, there would be no Microsoft. That's the power of luck. A random event, totally out of his control, that changed everything. But luck has a dark twin. At Lakeside, Gates's best friend was a kid named Kent Evans. And by all accounts, Kent was just as smart, just as driven, and just as good with that computer. The two of them were planning to take on the world together. Kent Evans never got that chance. He was killed in a mountaineering accident before he even graduated high school. And the odds of that happening? Also about 1 in a million. It's the exact same force with the exact same magnitude, just pointed in the opposite, tragic direction. That is risk. It's the hard reality that sometimes things can go terribly wrong for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with how smart you are or how hard you work. So what do we do with this? What's the takeaway? We have to respect both sides of that coin. When things go our way, we need a little humility to realize that luck probably played a role. And when we fail, we need to have some forgiveness for ourselves and for others to understand the brutal reality of risk. It's just a good reminder that nothing is ever quite as good or as bad as it might seem. And this brings us to another huge realization from the book. Getting rich and staying rich are two completely different skills. In fact, sometimes they require the exact opposite mindset. I mean, look at the story of the legendary trader Jesse Livermore. During the great stock market crash of 1929, he made the equivalent of $3 billion in a single day. He did it by taking massive risks, betting against the market. But that same hunger for risk, the very thing that made him rich, was also what completely destroyed him. He kept making bigger and bigger bets until eventually he lost every penny. You see, getting money often requires optimism and risk-taking, but keeping money, that requires the opposite. It requires a bit of fear, a bit of paranoia. It's really the skill of survival. It's about understanding that the game isn't just about big gains. It's about making sure you can stay in the game long enough for those gains to compound, without ever getting wiped out. Warren Buffett put it perfectly when he was talking about some super smart hedge fund managers who blew up. He said they were already incredibly rich, but to make money they didn't have and didn't need, they risked what they did have and did need. They risked their reputation, their careers, their existing fortunes, for more money they didn't even need. And as Buffett says, that's just foolish. So the real art of staying wealthy is simply the art of survival. It's about being unbreakable. So what does that mean in practice? Well, it means you don't get carried away with debt. It means you don't panic and sell all your investments when the market crashes. Your number one goal is just to avoid wiping yourself out at all costs. Because if you can do that, you can stick around long enough for the magic of compounding to do its work. And this leads us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. What's the point? What is money really for? It's not about having the fanciest car or a bigger number on a screen. The ultimate dividend that money pays is freedom. And this isn't just some nice-sounding idea. Decades of research back this up. A psychologist named Angus Campbell discovered that the single most powerful predictor of happiness, it's not your salary, it's not the size of your house, it's not the prestige of your job, it's having a strong sense of control over your own life. And that is the real goal. That's the whole point. The greatest intrinsic value of money is its ability to give you control over your time. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. That's true wealth. It's having options. So I'll leave you with this one last question to think about. What would that freedom really look like for you? What would you actually do if you could wake up every morning and honestly say to yourself, I can do whatever I want today? Because at the end of the day, using your money to buy back your own time, to give yourself options, that is one of the clearest paths to a truly rich life. And that's a lesson that's worth more than any stock tip.